Hello everyone, I'm Samuel Colchamiro here at Analog Shift, and today we are discussing a legend of high horology, the Lange and Sone Datograph, reference 403035. When Lange released this reference in 1999, it forever altered the face of high-end watchmaking, inspiring a revolution of in-house movement production and setting a new standard for what it means to create a high-quality watch. But don't just take my word for it. Ask the man who owns one himself.
The Datograph is widely considered the most important watch of the modern era. Since its introduction in 1999, the rest of the industry has been trying to catch up and fit the mold that this incredible, groundbreaking chronograph set. In many ways, it's the horological equivalent of the McLaren F1, a car that set the tone for every modern hypercar. In short, it's awesome.
For a little bit of context, Lange re-emerged in 1990 following the reunification of Germany after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And in 1994, the brand released their inaugural collection. Immediately, those first 4 pieces sold out, and collectors ate up the Lange brand. In the years that followed, Lange had set a standard that they would be producing high-end watches, and they had to continue to deliver. Their next major watch was the 1999 Datograph, which, as we mentioned, was pivotal for the brand. Taking a bit of a step back and analyzing Lange's biggest competitor, Patek Philippe, within the world of chronographs, we gain a bit of appreciation of why this Datograph was so special. In 1940, Patek Philippe released the reference 1463, their manually wound chronograph. And that watch was produced all the way until 1969. The 1463 was one of the most important Patek Philippe references and was based on a Valjoux movement, which Patek Philippe then took in-house, heavily modified and finished, and then cased within their watches. Then from 1969 all the way until 1998, there was no manually wound chronograph in Patek Philippe's catalog. But then in 1998, they released the reference 5070, this time based on the Lamdin 2310. The Lamdin 2310 was one of the most important movements of the last 100 years. It was used by Omega with the Calibre 321, which went in the Moon Watch. Vacheron Constantin has used the movement extensively throughout their Historiques collection and other manually wound chronographs, and this was really the standard for the industry during this period. What high horology brands would do is they would take a base kit of components, which they would then take in-house, heavily modify and refinish to meet their own standards, and package within one of their own cases in one of their watches. And no one ever really challenged this standard unless you were entering an independent space or a very, very small production manufacturer. This all changed in 1999 when Lange and Sone presented the 403035. This was the very first chronograph to feature a fully in-house movement while producing a serially produced watch for Lange. This set a completely new standard that the Swiss watchmaking industry was forced to correct to and change their own standards so that they could meet Lange's new benchmark. The first question that comes to mind is, why did Lange have to do this? And there are really 2 primary reasons. Firstly, Lange was still the newcomer on the block, and while in 1994 they released a pivotal collection that had captivated the minds of enthusiasts across the world, they were still relatively new to the game. And in order to further differentiate themselves in a competitive market, they needed to go a step further. And this was a statement. The watch was debuted at Baselworld in Switzerland. So picture the aesthetic of a Swiss gathering where Lange comes and completely upsets everything, producing such a groundbreaking watch. The other reason that this was particularly important was that, as we've covered in the past, Lange had a unique aesthetic. They were looking for a watch that was very different from what the Swiss watchmaking industry was producing. If you look at the Patek Philippe reference 5170, their modern chronograph, which now features an in-house movement, you'll notice that the case is a flowing case profile. It's thin, it's elegant, and that is the Patek Philippe and Swiss aesthetic. Lange, on the other hand, is going for something completely different. They're going for a bold design language. And in order to suit that bold design language, you need a movement that matches the watch. We've covered in the past the fact that Lange movements are riddled with details that call back to the pocket watchmaking era. And for Lange to take a movement from another manufacturer that has a Swiss tint to it and then refinish that movement for their watch, they would be doing so much reworking to that movement that it would no longer even look like the movement that it started as. And instead, what they decided to do was rebuild the movement from the ground up. And that is the foundation of the Calibre L951.1, which is arguably the most important movement that has been released in the last 100 years, which is a bold statement to make, but one that I personally believe is entirely true. Looking at this movement up close, you gain access to so many of the details of high-end watchmaking that you will not see anywhere else. We have the classic glasuta striping on the top of all of the bridge components. We have black polish across the entire movement. And this was a lateral clutch mechanism, so the entire clutch is black polished, which produces a scintillating effect when you look through the case back. We also have perlage on the base plate and a fully hand-engraved balance cock topped with a black polished swan's neck regulator. This movement looks nothing like any other movement on the market, and arguably the reason for this is, as we mentioned before, Lange was producing a bolder watch, and that meant that they could experiment with a slightly thicker case than Patek Philippe or Vacheron or any of the brands that were going for a slim wrist presence. And as a result, you get a depth on the Calibre L951.1 that you will not find anywhere else in the entire industry. And that's why this is considered by most to be one of the most aesthetically pleasing movements that you can possibly find on any watch. Something that we see on the L951.1 that is easy to miss, but something that watchmakers are particularly wary of, is that unlike many Swiss watches, which often avoid internal corners on watchmaking components of movements, Lange embraced sharp corners on their movement componentry. And the reason this is important is that one of the hardest things to finish on any movement is a sharp internal corner that needs angulage. Angulage, or slight beveling with mirror polish on the edge of a bridge, is applied by hand on a high-end watch. And forming a very perfect internal corner, but with that technique, is incredibly difficult. But Lange has embraced this level of finishing, which again was sort of a middle finger to the Swiss watchmaking industry, indicating that while they were new, they were capable of doing everything that the Swiss watchmaking industry had done, plus more. It was a symbolic move for Lange, it was somewhat of a flex, and it really complements the rest of this watch's design, which was really emphasizing the fact that you create a watch that makes no compromises at all. It's quality above anything else. And that is the German philosophy with A. Lange & Sone, set by the 1999 Datograph. When Lange introduced the Datograph, it was 39 millimeters in diameter, which is a comfortable wearing size even by modern standards. On the wrist, the Datograph feels almost like a Submariner, which is surprising because a platinum case that's this size actually wears quite comfortably, which is a real luxury when you're dealing with a manually wound chronograph, or a watch that might be susceptible to a really chunky wrist presence. The dial of this watch is just as striking as its case back. We have contrasting subsidiary dials, we have applied white gold Roman numerals across the dial, a black dial scape, and a framed date window in the outsize variant that we've come to know and love from A. Lange & Sone. The Datograph was produced in platinum, as we see here with the 403035, as well as in rose gold with the reference 403031. A certain rare group of variants were created, referred to as the yellow jacket, in yellow gold. These are extremely collectible today, and you do not see them very often, which is why they trade at a significant premium over the platinum and rose gold variants. The reference 403035 was produced from 1999 until 2012, when Lange then introduced the 405035, an updated version of the Datograph, and a number of changes were made. Firstly, the watch grew from 39 millimeters to 41 millimeters. We saw the introduction of an up-down complication, or a power reserve, referred to as the up-down because of the German words for up and down, which refer to empty and full power reserve. We also saw the phasing out of the Roman numeral aesthetic of the first generation Datograph, which was now replaced with stick indexes. On the new generation Datograph, we saw a slight change made on the movement end as well. We moved from caliber L951.1 to L951.6. The one major drawback of the L951.1, the original datograph movement, was that it only had a 36-hour power reserve. And as we entered a new phase of watchmaking in the 21st century, collectors were demanding a increased power reserve to be a little bit more conducive to everyday wear. And what we found was that with the L951.6 on the new datograph released in 2012 was a now updated 60-hour power reserve. And this was a notable improvement to the already legendary movement architecture. One of the key features that you'll find on the datograph movement was that, unlike most chronographs released in the 1900s, where the minutes counter will switch to the next minute slightly before the chronograph hand clears 60 seconds. On the datograph, you have an instantaneously changing minute counter. And this was achieved by using a snail cam system, which was incredibly elaborate and something that had not been seen before on a mass-produced level. When asked what the greatest watch released in the last 100 years or so was, watchmaking legend Philippe Dufour said that it was the datograph. And I think that this says a lot. One of the most important figures within the entire industry felt that this watch was the new standard. And what we found was that multiple brands then scrambled to catch up. Patek Philippe's first manually wound chronograph to feature a fully in-house movement was introduced in 2010. And Audemars Piguet did not create a flyback manually wound chronograph in-house until 2019. And this really speaks to just how impressive what Lange had achieved was. Keep in mind that Lange had only been around for 5 years when they released the datograph. This was something that you just simply would not see from any other Swiss manufacturer. And in the years following 1999, we have seen a paramount shift in the entire industry's approach to in-house watchmaking. Today, it's considered almost an expectation that if you're producing a high-end product, that the entire movement be created in-house. There's a certain accountability that a brand takes when they choose to manufacture a movement from the ground up. And Lange really is the reason that this is the way that the industry now behaves. It should be noted that in spite of the significance of this watch, most collectors do not know about the datograph. And that's surprising because this watch is really responsible for the way that the industry looks today. And since so few collectors truly appreciate this watch's full impact, you can still get these watches relatively reasonably compared to other manually wound chronographs. You're not paying that much more for a manually wound chronograph that changed the industry. For that reason, these watches are only going to become more and more collectible in the years to come. Watches become icons for a number of reasons, but in the case of the datograph, this watch is an icon as a result of the movement that it inspired among high-end watch brands to prioritize quality, take accountability for the product that you're delivering, and produce a watch movement fully in-house. The industry is forever changed as a result of the datograph, and for that reason, it may be the most significant watch released in the last 100 years. To view our full selection of Lange timepieces, including this 1815 chronograph, reference 402026, which is built upon the exact same architecture as the datograph, visit analogshift.com.